Hello! Welcome to Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming. I'm Mike Trabulsie, and this is Legends of Drumming. I want to share with you some of my thoughts about the legendary prog rock drummer, Neil Peart. Neil is what I consider, with the exception of some rudimental influences, a pure rock drummer. One of the things that immediately comes to mind are those epic drum fills. You've all heard them. They start up at the concert tom, the small concert tom, and they work their way around the kit. And sometimes the fills are standard, I would say, in terms of the rhythmic structure, and sometimes they're quite complex. Neil's, we'll call them signature drum fills, were really a critical part of his drumming. And his comrades in the band Rush, compositionally speaking, left plenty of room for him to craft and incorporate those classic signature drum fills. Of course, Neil played the big set, and he had the concert toms, which they don't have typically bottom heads, so they have, a really percussive sound. And that was certainly a signature element of the drum fills. Rhythmically speaking, Neil incorporated literally every rhythmic element on the planet. His fills had whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes, triplets. Neil incorporated every type of value that exists, and he incorporated them really intelligently. His fills were very well crafted. In fact, some of his fills, I would say they're so critical to the song that it almost became a compositional element of the song, a particular rhythmic fill with the melodic element that he would play. And it's a good lesson to really work on crafting that part of drumming. As far as the beats he played, they were well-crafted beats that fit really nicely with the song and the section of music at the moment. That speaks to his musical maturity. Just playing the right rhythm for the right section of music. And that's not to say that every single thing he played, or anybody for that matter, is the only thing that'll work. Sometimes there are many things that will work, or sometimes it seems that there is only one thing that will work. And he incorporated everything into his beats, the bell, the cymbal, the toms, the snare drum, the hi-hat, the crashes, really all of the tonal elements of the drum set. And that's something that you can be mindful of when you're crafting your own beats. What sound, or as I like to say, what color do you want to use to craft your rhythm to? And again, the song, the music in the song is what really you have to listen to. And ultimately, that's the deciding factor. What works in a particular musical section. And that is something that we can take away from his drumming style. And while we're talking about that, I've mentioned lineage in other lessons. Everybody comes from somewhere. We all start at day one. We all have the first day in our lives where we sit behind a drum set, pick up the sticks, and start playing. And through the course of everybody's development, we all learn from others, which is why I created this style studies class, so that we can take a look at some of these drummers who have made significant contributions and see what we can learn from them. This isn't about copying anybody. It's about learning what other drummers do and how can we improve our own drumming and maybe even incorporate some of those elements, which is not copying. Incorporating various elements of somebody's style into your drumming is different from copying. You can listen to, for example, the great Steve Gadd, probably the most copied drummer of the 20th century, probably of all time, the most copied drummer. But, I read an interview one time with Steve Gadd when he said that he was influenced by Elvin Jones. And I love Elvin Jones. I've listened to and I've studied Elvin Jones. And once I became aware of that connection between Gadd and Elvin Jones, I went back and listened to some of Elvin Jones' drumming. And a specific example is the cymbal, the way Elvin Jones played the ride cymbal in a jazz song. If you listen to Steve Gadd, you can hear those influences. And of course, to Steve Gadd's credit, he took it way beyond what Elvin Jones was doing, especially in some of his progressive jazz performances with Chick Corea. But there's that connection. There's that lineage. And that's what I'm speaking to as far as learning from somebody else. Anyway, back to Neil Peart. We've talked about his fills. We've talked about the structuring and the building of his rhythms and the use of color and the various tonal elements of the drum set, which he incorporated really nicely and intelligently. And, of course, most importantly, musically. Neil, of course, had the double bass drum setup. 2 bass drums. And you didn't hear a lot of that repetitive ostinato bass drum style of playing in Neil's drumming. For example, let's just take Tommy Aldridge. If you've listened to Tommy Aldridge, he does a lot of stuff where those double bass drums are cranking away on the 16th note, that ostinato. And, again, a lot of the music that he played really called for that. Rush's music, not so much. I assume that if Neil Peart was playing the type of music that Tommy Aldridge was playing, you certainly would have heard that. Because in many cases, the songs that Tommy Aldridge has performed on and recorded, they called for that. So in Neil Peart's drumming, you didn't hear a lot of that, but you did hear a really intelligent use of the double bass drums, especially in the fills. And he incorporated that tonal color. Remember, the bass drum is the biggest drum, and he had 2 24-inch bass drums. I use a 22. Neil Peart has an even bigger bass drum. So he's using those 24-inch bass drums. That's a big sound down there. And he incorporated that in with the other tonal colors of the drum set. And again, he did it very intelligently, both in terms of the sound, incorporating the sound element of the big bass drum, but also the rhythmic element of those double bass drums. He could be playing fills with 16th notes or 32nd notes or 16th note triplets, and you would hear those double bass drums worked in there. So I wouldn't say his double bass drumming was a key, heavy component of his drumming, but it was an element of his drumming that was intelligently and musically worked in. And that's the best way to do it. Again, what does the music call for? Another element of Neil Peart's style of drumming is his use of rudiments. Many of the things that us drummers love about drumming, the rudiments and how to use them and, how to incorporate them into fills and beats, all that sort of drum stuff, Neil Peart did. And I would actually say that his application of the rudiments to the drum set were really a big part of his drumming. I mean, you'll hear single stroke rolls, double stroke rolls, you'll hear flams, paradiddles, and you'll hear them applied to the drum set in many different ways. There's no question in my mind that Neil knew the drum rudiments, practiced the drum rudiments, and worked on incorporating them into his artistry. It's very obvious. And he did it in a very musical way. The rudiments, I mean, sometimes you can rigidly apply them to the drum set and they sound great. And other times you can manipulate them either rhythmically or sonically in terms of sound, break them up between the limbs. There's creative ways to apply the rudiments to the drum set. And Neil Peart certainly had that covered. That, in my opinion, is definitely a key component of his style of drumming. The last main element of Neil's style is something that is really, truly hard to capture. And that has to do with his feel, the way his rhythms and beats and fills felt. And capturing somebody's feel is probably the most difficult thing. I mean, honestly, it's one of many reasons where in my own drumming performances, I don't do a drum cover copy. I do an interpretation. There are many reasons why I do that, and I'm not going to go into them all here, but one of the many reasons is that attempting to capture somebody's exact feel, I'm not going to say it's impossible or that nobody can ever do it, but it's the most difficult thing to capture. You can take, for example, a Neil Peart drum fill, and you can play it note for note. But can you make it feel and sound precisely, precisely the way he did? I mean, I'm sure some people can do that, but capturing somebody's feel is difficult. And why is that? And I think it's because we're all built differently. We all have different body structures. We all have individual, unique brains wired in a certain way. And that connection between the brain and the body is so individualized. And that's, by the way, what makes music and drumming, one of the things that makes it so great. Everybody brings to it something that's theirs. That's why for everybody out there, you want to develop your individual artistry. You don't want to be Neil Peart or John Bonham or Billy Bruford or Terry Bozzio. You want to be you. Yes, you want to learn from these great drummers, but you want to be you. You want to develop an individualized artistry. And so we study people, but ultimately it's about morphing what we get into ourselves. But back to the feel. Everybody has a certain musculoskeletal structure which affects the way you play the drums. We also apply tension and relaxation in different ways. If you hit a drum with tense muscles, really tense, and then you hit the drum in a very relaxed and fluid way, that drum sounds different. And so the application of tension and relaxation, which, by the way, I think most drummers just, it comes naturally. It's something that develops as your style develops because it's a part of who you are. I can say that because it's something I think about, there are times in my own drumming where I do, purposely try to relax more, or I may play with a little more tension. But generally speaking, when you're playing, you're not really always thinking about that so much as you are just playing the music of the moment, which is what you want to do. When you're playing music, when you're immersed in a song, you want to be immersed in a song. That's when the best of you comes out. And that's when the true artist in you comes out. Because whatever is hardwired and built into you expresses itself in those moments when you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just doing. So Neil's feel, it was highly individualized, for sure. But there was something really magical about it. I'd have to say, of all the elements of his drumming, the epic fills, the signature fills, the beats, the use of the double bass drum into the fills, the excitement he was able to generate, the intensity he was able to generate. I think for me, one of the things I loved most was just the way he felt when he played. Listen to any Neil performance with Rush and dial in on the way the rhythms, beats, and fills feel. And you'll notice what will emerge and you'll become aware of his, I would say, unique feel. There are scores of drummers you can listen to and maybe not know who it is. There's also scores of drummers you can listen to and you immediately know who it is. Immediately. And it's because, I'm not being negative about the drummers that you can't maybe necessarily tell, because honestly, sometimes in a recording studio, you want to be invisible, so to speak, in terms of the drum track. You don't always want to put your signature on it. But there were so many drummers, and some of the ones I named, Billy Bruford, John Bonham, Terry Bozzio, Neil Peart, drummers like that, you listen, and it's like a taste test. You know exactly what it is, or who it is, I should say. And that was one of the great things about Neil. He had a unique, individualized, very identifiable feel that is really, it's just great. It's really great to listen to Neil Peart. So I hope you've taken away from this class a little bit of the stylistic elements of Neil Peart's drumming. And there's other things that we could talk about, but I think we covered the main elements of his style here. And again, we're not here to copy anybody. We're here to recognize and identify a style, a great style, by the way, and learn from it. Learn from it. I want to thank you for being here with me today, and please join me at Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming.